Welcome to the English 403A British and World Literature Weekly Starter for February 9th, 2015. Let's get started. By the end of this session, you'll know what you should do this week. You'll also know what an epic is and how an epic fits into the oral tradition. You'll be able to immerse yourself into Beowulf and Old English by hearing what it sounds like, and you'll be able to identify some key elements for Beowulf. Please make sure you pay close attention because the quiz for the phrase that pays this week will be taken from this session. Let's look at the calendar. So it's probably Monday when you're watching this, and you should have done lessons 1 and 2 of Unit 1 last Thursday and Friday. If you haven't, this is a great day to get caught up before it's too overwhelming. You should be doing Lesson 3, which is to read the selections from Beowulf and Grendel. And then make sure you also take the quiz. That should be the 2-9 quiz, not the 9-9 quiz. Tomorrow, you're going to do Lesson 4, which will analyze and look at the characters in Beowulf. And I hope you'll join me for the 11 a.m. weekly spotlight that will not only go through Beowulf, but also into the Iliad, and in particular, Hector and Achilles. On Wednesday, you have your first official quiz. So make sure that you review for that with Lesson 5. And then, like I said, on Thursday and Friday, you'll be starting the selections from the Iliad. Let's continue forward. All right, I want you to think about something. Who is your favorite superhero? In today's society, superheroes are all the rage. There's movies and television shows, and there seems to be a superhero mania, and everybody has their favorites. Maybe they more like the Dark Knight Batman, or maybe they like the pure Captain America. Well, guess what? Superheroes aren't new. They've been around for hundreds of years. They just were different. Way back in the oral tradition, we have heroes such as Beowulf and Hector and Achilles. And these heroes are in what are considered epics. And we see them in epic poetry. But as I noted, they were heroes long before these stories were written down. They were part of what we call the oral tradition, and we're going to go over that in a little bit. But let's first talk about what is an epic. An epic is a long narrative poem that celebrates the deeds of a heroic figure. Now, just to remind you, narrative means it tells a story. Let's dig a little bit more deeply into this idea. When we talk about epics, we're usually talking about epic poetry. So we have this lengthy narrative poem, and these poems are used to tell some sort of history. In fact, if we look at the literary dictionary, we can get a few more insights into what an epic is. A long narrative poem, it has an elevated style, and it presents characters of high position and adventures. So if you look at the epics such as the Odyssey, the Iliad, and Beowulf, the main characters, these heroes, are not low class. They are upper class figures, so that's really important. We see them in a central heroic figure and through the development of episodes important to the history of a nation or race. So these heroes are either saving a nation or a race or being featured in that history. So why do we study these ancient tales? In particular, let's talk about Beowulf. Why should we study something that is so old? Well, one reason is because it is so old. It's the oldest poem in the English language, so everything written since Beowulf stems from it in some way. Also, as we note with great literature, the story of Beowulf encompasses common themes that we still see in English literature and life today. So let's dig more deeply now that we know why we should study Beowulf. What is this story, Beowulf? Well, it captures life among Germanic warrior tribes of Northern Europe during the early Middle Ages. This is a time where you had drinking halls and men also slept. It's really hard for us in today's society to relate to it, but if you want a visual, let's go back to what the films many of you have seen, The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien actually based his novels, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, on many Anglo-Saxon elements. So the movie versions of those novels we see some of those same pieces. For instance, in Two Towers and Return of the King, we'll see characters such as Éowyn, and we see the group of the horse riders the Rohirrim and the halls where they are. That's very much the type of thing that we'll see in Beowulf. During this time period, people lived in constant fear of attack from both human and superhuman enemies. They did believe in this idea of the superhuman, and they saw so many tragedies in their lives, and in an attempt to explain them, they often created these superhuman enemies. So what is this Old English? Well, here is the website, just in case this little video won't play for you on your end. But let's listen to Old English to immerse ourselves even further into this idea and this time period. All right, so that gives you some insight into what Old English sounds like. Now, again, if you're familiar with The Lord of the Rings, you may hear some similarities to the languages that Tolkien created. And again, he was an Anglo-Saxon scholar, and so was influenced by those. Now, this Old English, that's what you would have heard Beowulf first told as, rather than it being written. Way back, you had these bards or shope who went around and they told histories, they sang epics, poems from memory, told news. This was the way things were related from place to place. You didn't have things like the Pony Express or emails, text messaging. So these shope had to memorize these stories. And that is why we'll see in these poems, such as Beowulf and the Iliad, many literary devices such as epic similes and, excuse me, didn't mean to go ahead here, and literation and kennings and other pieces. We're going to go more deeply into this in the weekly spotlight that I hope you'll join me for. So let's talk about what types of thematic elements that we see in Beowulf. All of these ideas create messages and themes in the text. And these are things that we still deal with today. Things like good versus evil and light versus dark. In Beowulf, actually, we see that black and white is not so clear cut. Beowulf, our hero, does understand this, which makes him stand out because he can see that there isn't this binary, everything is not all or nothing. An example of this is the insect, the bees. They have honey and make honey, and they also can sting you, so there's a help and a hurt. We also see the idea of evil as a force of supernatural destruction. It seems to have no motive. So that's something that these people are dealing with. Do we see that today? What about the idea that strength aided by goodness and intelligence, that you have to have all of those qualities? And then again, a celebration of heroic deeds and qualities. There are other ideas and themes in Beowulf. I hope that as you read Beowulf and Grendel, the selection from the entire epic poem, that you'll see others. All right, so that's the end of our weekly starter. I hope that you learned some things. I hope you enjoyed it. Please join me for the weekly spotlight to get more on Hector and Achilles and also more on Beowulf. At this time, go to your course, English 403A, scroll to the bottom of the units, and you'll see the weekly spotlight, the weekly starter links for the quiz for 2/9/15. And go ahead and click on it, and I hope you were paying attention so that you do well on the quiz. Thank you so much, and have a great week.